What's going on, YouTube? Welcome to another Bible time. I don't even know what I'm calling this series. This is only the second video of what I hope to be a long influence on my channel. See, why do my ears look like elf ears? Tuck those in. One of the cool things that influencers have is a voice, and I think that that's really powerful. And although I'm not reaching the multitude right now, I'd like to think that the one spark of a video could. And so at one point, I want to be able to share my story and in such a way that can influence somebody else to understand Jesus a little bit better. And so, what we're going to be talking about today is testimonies. Testimonies are really important concepts, scripturally as well as in our own lifetimes. There we go. Sure. There's this famous quote that says, "No one cares about how much you know until they know how much you care." And I think that's really interesting because unless you're willing to be personal with someone, to be deep with someone spiritually, in conversation, then they're never going to hear you out. And I think it's really important for us as Christians to recognize this and to not only recognize this but live by this. So I want to share my testimony as a part to this channel, but I also want to talk about what a testimony does. So my testimony starts when I was probably 8 years old, right? I grew up in a somewhat broken home. My mother and father loved each other, but it was never rainbows and roses, right? So my sister grew up. She couldn't stand my father. She grew up with a different dad than I did. My mom married 3 times, and so for each marriage, each child was left to see my mother go to the next man, except mine. And so I have a lot more love for my father and mother and some aspects like that. That being said, my sister grew up with this bitterness, right? Like, this isn't my dad who is living in this household anymore. It was my dad. My dad was all about WWE. I remember watching Stone Cold Steve Austin on a Sunday morning, Saturday morning, whatever. And it was a really, maybe not healthy relationship, but it was a really good relationship in which I knew both parents loved me very much. That all changed when my father got hooked up on drugs and got put in situations where he was put with the wrong people. My dad was always a wildcat, right? So he would always find the thrill in life and always seek for the adventure. And so he got into a situation in which he was so hooked up on drugs that he began sleeping around. He began not treating my mom well. Never physical, mental, maybe some emotional abuse, but it was just, he was in a dark place. And I remember my mom and dad always fighting and bickering, and there were plenty of times that I didn't understand the situation. I remember my dad driving into my house parking lot, and I'd come out to the car and he was telling me about how my mom and dad were getting separated. And that was a really hard conversation for me to have, because I was like, Mom, Dad, I have this perfect relationship. That was already so broken at that time, but it was like I was losing something, right? And a little bit later, my dad gets arrested. The charge is conspiracy of crack cocaine. And if you don't know, this conspiracy charges, they were meant to really target members of the mafia and mobs that had other people do their works. And so they would use this conspiracy term, right, to get to the person that they actually wanted. So I think that you did something, and I have pretty good evidence that you probably did something, so we are going to convict you of it. My father was not convicted, but somebody snitched on him, basically. I don't have any issues with snitching if it's, but my father was basically being snitched on, and he was arrested, and he was put in prison for 7 years. I was 10 years old when that happened, 9 or 10. And they have a rule in prison where if you have good behavior, they'll let you out. I think it's like 10% of your sentence early. So he got almost a year off in some forms. But I was about 16 when he came out, and so if you understand the growth aspect of a boy going into manhood, that's a really important time to lose your father. To keep summarizing, my father leaves, and my mom and I are broken. I start school. I am completely distracted. I could care less about everything going on. I hate school. Middle school was so bad. I don't know how they kept pushing me ahead. I guess middle school was based off of if your parents wanted to deal with you going to high school or if they wanted to hold you back. So I often got pushed ahead, and I don't understand why, but my grades were horrible. And I remember one vivid day. I was sitting at lunch with my mom and my grandfather, and we were just talking and talking. He just came from church. He wanted us to go to lunch after church. We came in shorts and sandals, didn't care. We weren't churchgoers. And then he looks at my mom and he looks at me and he says, I'm narrating a play at the church, and it would really mean a lot to me if y'all would come to it. Now, my grandfather was always meaningful to my life. He passed away recently, and that was really hard for me, but he was always that father figure when my father actually went for prison. And so I went. I decided, Mom, let's go see grandfather as a narrator. He was doing a Easter play, I believe, right? So we sit down in this church of 50 or 60 people, and I remember sitting there looking at my mom and going, man, this is such a confusing place. They dress up. Like, who dresses up? Now, I believed in God at that point, but as we know in James 1 or 2, that even the demons believe and they shudder, right? So I believed in a God. I didn't really know how to grasp that. And so I was going to this church, and I see all these people dressed up, and I'm like, what in the world? And an angel, a person dressed as an angel, I guess, a little kid, by this age, I was probably 5th or 6th grade, starts walking down the center aisle, and I looked at him, and I was like, that's my friend. I go to middle school with him. And I was completely culture shocked to think that people actually decided to go to church to see a play, one, and then to see people I knew at this church. And I remember battling with this complete brokenness of my life and deciding, there's something here. So I go, we had Wednesday night church, right, where you'd go, and I went a couple times, and I really liked the teacher there, but, there was like 2 or 3 kids, and I was like, this is weird, but I was on the cusp of the next group, right, and so finally I move up to the next group, and one of the first few weeks I'm there, the teacher looks at me, and she says, Jackson, do you believe in Jesus? And I pause, and I'm like, well, of course, I guess I believe in Jesus. She was, no. Do you believe in Jesus? Have you made the decision to live for Jesus? Well, I guess I haven't, right? So she holds my hands, and she says, Jackson, for eternity, this is the cost. To believe in Jesus is to be given everlasting life. And so, 10-year-old me who's trying to learn more about it, I decided that moment on a winter Wednesday night where there were 2 people in the room that I was going to live for Jesus. And so I tell this because what happens from that moment doesn't make it easier, but I hope it illustrates something that divorced homes I get. So I come out of that, and all through middle school I struggle. I'm a horrible kid. My father is making crazy promises that he can't keep. And I go into high school, and my mom puts an ultimatum in front of me and says, Jackson, if you want to become something, you need to actually start caring about everything else. And it took me a minute. It was around this time that God speaks on my life, and he says, I want you to be a pastor. And I didn't want to be a pastor. To speak in public has not been my thing. I've developed that skill. I am very bold, but speaking in public is not a love of mine. Being center of attention is not a love of mine. And so I take this command that God has given me, and now this challenge that my mother has given me, and I have to put them together. I start my freshman year and I do really bad. Then my sophomore, my junior, and my senior year, I really start focusing in on what my goals actually are. To be a Christian, but to not only be a Christian, to be respected. So I started studying my Bible more. I started studying my school texts more. Started caring about the people I was around. Started bringing my Bible to school. I know that sounds weird. It was a different time than it is now. I'm 25. If you're watching this and you're still in middle or high school, then this sounds crazy. But I would bring my Bible to school because I knew that would be a talking point. Someone would go, Jackson, why did you bring your Bible to school? And I would bring it just to have that conversation. I was a smart kid for a minute. Get through high school, right? Here comes the big decision. Where are you going to go to school? I look around, and I decide that there's one Christian school that I'm really looking at. One that was kind of on the cusp, that was in Florida. I was like, that's kind of far. And I decided to go to a school pretty much in my hometown. And I go there for all 4 of my years. I passed college with like a 3.7, something like that. And one of the crazy things is that my college was basically paid for. It was a university, but I didn't have to struggle for that payment. I have been in such blessings. I got to work at camps. I got to work with children. I got to work with teens and really get to share the gospel. I remember one time I was at a Christian camp, and I was the only counselor, only male counselor for the night. And so I had 2 cabins. It was terribly unsafe. But I remember that every night you would give a devotion. And so my cabin, I said, hold on, guys, go take your showers. I'll get with you. So I go to the other cabin, and I give a devotion. And I remember that every single person in that room was completely in tears and crying and just decided to all give their lives to God or to make a recommitment to God. And I remember just, man, I really see my purpose here. And then I go back to my cabin after they've all given their showers, and I give a message, and the same situation happens. And God was just working through me, and I realized that it was in that moment that God was just going to use me for such great things. And I've been a youth pastor for 4 or 5 years now. I've been doing ministry for like 7 years now. I'm working with young adults now, so I'm really middle school to age 35 currently, and it's such a blessing. But I tell this all because I come from a situation that was broken, right? And some people are going to be coming from situations way worse than me, and I get that. But to not have a father, who ultimately attempted in every way to try to hold a relationship that really needed to be broken. I was a broken kid, and when I tell this story, I always say that I lost my earthly father, but I gained a heavenly father, and it's extremely true. My relationship with God has been so strong, and whenever I'm in a situation of peril I don't know what to do, I can just pray to God and feel comfort in that, to feel welcomed and loved. And even when all of my anxiety is over me, that to know that He is there with me is so real and so attainable. Um, so why is telling a testimony important? Paul tells his testimony. He talks about how he's been stoned twice. He died once while he was stoned. He's been shipwrecked. He has a thorn in his side, and all these imageries. And when you hear it, you're just like, oh my gosh. Well, I don't know. That's something I've never experienced, and I don't know how you get through that. And there are people who are going to hear my testimony and be, well, that was easy. But to the people who may be hearing my testimony and go, wow, that's really strong and powerful, I hope that you can see why your testimony is important. Maybe you grew up in the church. Maybe all you've ever known is the church. Your testimony is important too, because God has protected you and produced in you a strong foundation to which you can conquer the world and His kingdom. But in the same way, God gave me a challenge to start off, that I had to learn love and to learn faith and to fall into that. And I think that a testimony is extremely powerful, because your testimony can change how one person perceives Jesus, how one person perceives God. I was watching, and I don't remember how accurate this is, so I'm going to share it anyway. I remember watching a show that was talking about all the different gods of every culture, and one of the reasons that make it so powerful is experience, right? So I know God exists because I experienced Him. And I tell you that because your experience can challenge somebody else so that they can understand why you believe, and then will be giving that challenge to themselves. Maybe there is a God. Maybe, Jackson went through that. Maybe Jeffrey or Jenna or John or whoever went through that. And because of that, maybe there's something to it. Maybe I should look into this. And so I hope this is encouraging to you, but also challenging to you. We used to teach our kids and our counselors at camp that a testimony doesn't have to be as long-winded as mine was. Testimony can last 2 minutes and get the point out. Start with who God is to you. Start with where you were before you knew God. If you knew God always, then that is your testimony. Add to that. Get to the point where you actually accepted Jesus, or you actually built a relationship with Jesus, whatever term that your denomination uses. And then talk about what Jesus has done for you after. This little testimony can mean the world to everybody listening to it. And that's really important. And so I think that as you go on, try and share your testimony. Because that's what Jesus tells us in Matthew 28:19-20. He says to go out and make disciples of every nation and baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, and teaching them the ways that I have commanded you. And the way to share that is by what Jesus has done for you and what Jesus has done for me. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this was powerful, or it may have given you some clarity on some situations in your life. So thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, make sure to subscribe. I'm hoping to make more content like this in the near future. Bye, guys.